Chapter 1 continued, working digitally. Now that we're in Photoshop, we're going to do the same thing as we did with the tracing paper and draw over our photos in order to break them down into simple shapes. Now, to get started, I'm going to open up a new file, and it's going to be the same size as last week, where it was 1920 by 1080 with a 72 as the resolution, pixels per inch. Hit create. Okay, so last week we talked about the overall workspace of Photoshop, as well as a little introduction to the layer system. And hopefully by now you've gotten comfortable using the layers and moving out the images and photographs for the collage. But today we're going to be talking about a new tool because we're actually going to be drawing. So on the left side on the tools panel, we're also going to be using the brush tool. Now, if you right click as I did here, you're going to find different subcategories for this tool. For now, you just want to make sure it's on the brush tool. These other mixer brush and color replacement, it's more for photo retouching, so we only care about this one. Now, the other things that we want to learn about are these other window panels. So we had the layers open, and now we're also going to be using the brush panel as it's open here. Now this one usually comes with the brush presets tab, and the difference is the brush presets have a certain amount of options for these brushes that already have a certain setting. And in terms of the brush here, you can change the shapes of each brush. And right now I'm just going to be using a very Photoshop standard, which is the round shape brush. But I will also start to add a bit of shape dynamics and transfer. So just a quick overview, especially for those of you that are new to Photoshop. So the brush tip shape, if I turn these options off, so from here, we're basically just going to be left with the actual shape of the brush. And when we do a stroke on it and start to draw some lines, it'll be nice and even. So all these properties are off, and it'll be just a very solid looking line. Now, as soon as I turn on some options, such as shape dynamics, which I really like, this will change the size as you go along. Now, in terms of control, you do have to activate it. I like to set it on pen pressure. Now for this, it's going to be very similar to a brush or a pencil or even a marker, where the harder you press, the larger and thicker the line gets. So if I press really light, it'll be nice and thin. If I press harder, it'll be, a lot thicker to the actual size of the brush. Now this is really handy when it comes to getting some nice line quality. So it's a really flexible option here. The other thing I like to play around with is the transfer or opacity option. I also like to set this on pen pressure. And just like a pencil, if you press lightly, it'll be nice and light. If you press harder, it'll be darker. So try to play around with different options and see what are the best. And if you actually find a set of options that you really enjoy with your brush, you can simply open this little panel here and you can actually save it. So this could be the hard round brush, version 5. Hit OK. And that'll be saved in your brush presets, and it normally would save it under the very bottom of the list. Okay, so very useful to have. Besides making marks with our brush, we're of course going to need to erase them as we make mistakes. So from here, there is an eraser tool, just a few links down from the brush, and you want to have it on the standard eraser tool. So this one acts like a brush as well, just in reverse. This also shares the same shapes as the brushes here. So just this eraser is just a standard round brush, which I can use to erase the marks I made. Pretty straightforward, and it comes in handy when you need a different shape depending on what you're trying to erase. Now, besides the layers and brushes that we're going to use, we'll also need to change the color and value of the marks we're actually going to try to make. So under the Windows tab, you could find the color panel, or you could use the F6 shortcut to open up the window. Now here, the most standard way of picking colors for us concept artists is usually the HSB sliders. And it's pretty straightforward, where the H stands for hue, S is for saturation, and B for brightness. Now for most of our purposes when we're drawing, we'll just need a black and white image. We can turn the saturation all the way down. So regardless of the color that's actually being chosen, it's only going to be black and white. So based on the brightness, it could be light to dark and everything in between. Now that we've gotten that mini Photoshop lesson out of the way, we can finally get back into it and start drawing again. So here I've gone ahead and placed in my photograph of the still life that I'm going to be breaking down. So from here, the contrast is still really high, and any kind of drawing I do on top might get lost within the photograph. So what I need to do is check out the layer properties. So while selecting the layer that includes this image, I'm going to head over to opacity and bring it down to about 55 or 60%. And this should be light enough to where I can draw on top of it, just like tracing paper, and get some nice clean drawing on top that's easy to see. All right, you can experiment to see what works best for your photograph. Your mileage may vary, but for this one, I think about 50% to 60 works best. I'm also gonna put another layer and rename it for, I'm gonna rename it just to stay organized. All right, now from here, just going to do the usual thing where I can pick my brush preset. I'm going to go with one of my drawing tools. And for the color, I can just keep it dark for now. Now if you need to change the size of your brush, you can do so up here, changing the size. Or if you have a shortcut, you can just use the open and close brackets to increase the size of your brush. All right, so first step would be to mark in the border. And just like the previous lesson, we're going to turn this into simple shapes, starting with the large ones if we can. So from here, we've got the circle. And then from here, I'm going to mark off, even if I can't see the rest of the cone, I'm going to try to mark it off and just draw the triangle that's in there. Now with Photoshop, you'll notice that it might be harder to draw these longer lines, especially if you're not turning the canvas. There is an option to turn it around, but the best you can, just try to mark off these simple shapes. So for this one, I'm going to keep it on the straight lines, marking off the dots and just drawing accordingly. Okay. Now there is a lot of detail in the background, but I'm going to ignore all that And I'm just going to get the main parts of the cloth with the table that it's on. From here, the shadows are also a shape itself. So that is something I do want to mark off. This one over here, it's a longer shadow. And over here, we have the shadow of the cube. Okay. Now the neat thing about layers is you can turn them off and on. So there's this little eye symbol next to each layer. And if you turn this one off, you can see just your line work on top and see how well you did on the breakdown. Okay. Before I move on to another image, I'm gonna go ahead and color code my shapes just to get in the habit of categorizing my priorities. So creating a new layer here, and off to the color picker or the swatches, I can start to choose what colors I want to use. And in general, just use something that's easy to see. So for the first one, I'll use red. And this could be my large shapes. Mediums could be blue. And then perhaps green for my small shapes. Another neat tool to learn is also the eyedropper tool. So over here, or for me it's I for the shortcut. And whatever color you touch with the eyedropper tool, that's the color that will be chosen. So this will be for my medium shapes. Alright, so from here, I'm going to take my largest shape, which is actually the cloth that it's on top of for the still life. Moving on to my medium shapes, it would be this part of the cube. Now the reason I'm not drawing the lines inside, again, I'm just trying to keep it in the 2D realm and not drawing forms yet. Okay, so I got my medium shape. This one has the same amount of mass. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the triangle and classify it as a medium shape. And so is this circle. Okay, and then from there, I would classify the shadows as my small shapes. Okay. And then from there, I have my 3 layers. And what you can do is, instead of starting a new file, you can always combine them together. One thing I like to do is select all 3 layers. So I'm going to hold Shift and highlight all 3 layers for this image. And I'm going to stick them in a folder. So you'll see a folder symbol at the bottom here. Create new group. And that'll be classified as group 1. So they'll kind of stay together. And if you decide to turn them off and on, you can work on a new group with a different set of images. And instead of trying to resize each and every single layer to try to get them to match, when you have them in a group, when they're all selected like this, you can easily size them around and just save it for your homework presentation. For this next demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit more complex. So here we have an image of a landscape. This is basically just a photograph I took many years ago on a little mini trip. So from here, we definitely have a lot more going on, but we're still going to treat it the same way by breaking down these simple shapes. So we'll go ahead and set up the file. Make sure that the proportions are correct. Make it large enough so it's easier for us to draw. Just like the other one, just change the opacity lower, and we'll get to drawing. Again, it's really important to just get in the habit of drawing the border in first. It is definitely an important aspect for our designs and just image making overall. All right, so usually trying to pick what the largest shapes would be, I usually try to find what's easier to draw, like what's more apparent from here. And just like week one, I'm dotting things off so it's easier for me to connect the lines. I don't want to be trying to sketch every single little detail in there like this. So I want to build off from what we learned last week and just kind of mark things off, dot them off, and connect the lines. It doesn't have to be super accurate like you see here. It's all about trying to get that true mark. Okay, from here we also have this long pole. For those of you that are doing this both traditionally and digitally, you'll notice the pros and cons of each one. For doing a lot of line work, if you don't have a Cintiq, it's definitely much easier to do line work with just pencils and pens on paper. Of course, if you can afford one, Cintiqs are a great investment if you do a lot of line work. Okay. So just getting the shape of this building down. Now, yes, I don't see the roof, the entire roof at least, but I can see where it starts and ends. So I'm going to do my best to pretend this is see-through and try to get the line in there. Okay, especially behind all these bushes and trees. I can try to imagine how this side looks. All right. Okay, so there's also all of the foliage that's going on around this landscape, which is the next thing for me to tackle. Even though there isn't a clear divider here where the trees meets the dirt, I'm going to do my best to just simplify and make a straight line for now, just so it's easier for me to draw. And then from there, I'm going to use simple ovals and circles and organic simple shapes to break down the rest of the foliage. So this palm tree in the back, maybe just a circle. And then something like this for the trunk. So it's kind of like a lollipop shape. And the thing about shape simplification, when you're breaking down your image like this, there isn't so much a right or wrong answer. Now, a different artist might choose to break down the shapes a little bit differently. For example, with this tree here, one might choose to use only straight lines to simplify the shape. So that's one solution. Another solution might be to use just an oval, like so. Now, this exercise, you can kind of pick and choose and experiment with different shapes and see what works best for you and what you're more comfortable with. So again, it's kind of a trial and error thing, but in general, no artist is the same as another. Just as long as you're not trying to break down each little flower like such, that'll just take way too long and it doesn't help you at all with your drawing. I'm going to go ahead and simplify these trunks. And the rest of the foliage. And just some details in the architecture that's important, like this door. And perhaps a line that can connect these details here. So instead of trying to break down each little shape in this area, there is one unifying shape in here that I can use to connect. Okay. So we can double check our work just to see how the shape simplification is working. I see that I've missed a few areas. So this foliage here, and I could probably group some of the flowers into circles. And then just kind of go back and forth to see what shapes we can edit. There are a few in here that I'm not entirely happy with yet, but it is a work in progress. So it's mainly on this side for me where I have too many things going on like this, and it's not really that simple. So what I'm going to do is actually create this into one larger shape. That simplifies it a lot easier. So that's definitely something I'm a lot happier with versus the one where it had too many stair steps going on and it just made it more complex than it needed to be. All right. And as usual, go ahead and color code the rest. And I'll most likely speed up this next section in order to just get through this demo. Continue doing this assignment until you have at least 4 done. And again, this warm-up is flexible enough that you can do it either traditionally or digitally. When you are done, however, make sure you include them on a single sheet like so. You want to group them up and also label them with letters. That way it's easier for me to critique, as well as we'll be using this for a later assignment. Even though we are tracing over photos, make sure you take your time and really analyze these shapes and continue to practice what we've learned from week 1. And once you've gotten comfortable with this warm-up, you'll be ready for the next section.